But they grow up with it. I think that's right.
Yeah, I think they do.
They're so good. Okay. We're settled. I'm interviewing Ann Zugelder at her home at 204 North Taylor, and she's going to talk about her life as a teacher, starter organizer of the library, and just as an active community citizen. So shall we start off with where you were born? And
Yes. I was born in Monroe County, Iowa, in a farmhouse near my grandparents, mother's parents. And I lived there for several years. My grandparents lived off on the hill. I can remember, I was a brave kid, I guess, because there was even Indian mounds up on the mountain. And I never was afraid to cross them. I went when I was about 7. The 2 or 3 miles that I could see their white house up on the hill. And I went by myself to visit my grandmother. And it was spring, and I had to cross a creek. And I remember there was a bench of ground right between the two where the creek had split. And when I came up to the top of that, there was just covered with violets. And I never forgot my trip to grandmother's. I didn't go very often, but that was one time. But there were Indian mounds up there. I knew what they were. We talked about them, but we just treated it as a cemetery. That was all there was.
now, can I ask you what year that was, or turn of the
that would
century?
have been about 1908.
Oh, okay. You were
born in 1901.
Okay.
And we lived on this farm a while. Father had bought it, but he wasn't. It wasn't a very big place, and he wasn't interested much in farming. He liked to build things. So we moved then for a little over a year to Lawton, Oklahoma. And again I saw Indians. I don't remember. It was the first time I'd ever ridden on a train. And I remember the train ride just somewhat, you know. I was 5, and we got down there. Of course, my father had work right away, and we rented a house, and we didn't know anybody. But I soon was a friend of Tommy Whaley. And Tommy Whaley was a little fat boy, about my age probably, a little younger I think. One of our biggest problems was trying to get some marbles from under the front porch of a house. I can remember we sat there and figured out there was lattice all around, and we figured out how to get those marbles out. Well, I played with Tommy. They wouldn't let me go to school. I wasn't old enough. I expected when I was 5.
When you had your book, do I still have your book here? This is your book. Is this when you had this book?
I suppose I had this alphabet book, yes.
You taught yourself to read out of it.
Yes, that I taught myself to read, but I thought I'd go to school. I was a disappointment. But we did, there were some interesting things about Oklahoma. We went to Sunday school, and they had a picnic out along Crystal Creek. And I saw children in the water with water wings floating along, little girls. But I was quite horrified to see the Indian woman not far off. She'd stripped her children. She was washing her clothes on the rocks. And that was to a child who was always never supposed to appear any place in the nude, you know, that was something. But we watched the woman wash her clothes and rub them on rocks. And we did see a number of Indians, because that was part right of the reservation, Lawton was, you know. And so that was my real contact with Indians, but they were just people. I think if children are allowed to look at people, they accept them, they're just people. Color doesn't make any difference, or clothes, or anything, lots of times.
Or even what they do, whether they wash the clothes on the rocks, or...
It didn't make any difference, you know. We did experience a tornado there. One evening, we were eating our supper, and a man came banging up the back screen, and he said, "Quick, come to the cellar." And my father, I can remember, said, well, we're eating supper. He said, bring something along, but get it over here. And it was in the block there. And so we went into that hole in the ground. It was just a cellar, dirt cellar. And all I remember about it was the 3 men holding on to ropes to hold the door down, you know. And we were all in there. They told us to bring some blankets or some pillows or something. And it was an awful roar. Mm-hmm. I can remember that. And then the next thing I remember, I woke up in my own house, in my own bed. They'd carried us home sometime in the night. The next morning we did go out. Our neighborhood was intact. But we went a short ways away, not more than 2 blocks. And there were houses that were just all torn to pieces. And there was a piano in a tree.
Oh my goodness. Well, you'd remember that, wouldn't you?
Yes,
Piano in
something
a tree.
like that, you remember.
Right.
I think I was more interested in getting back, though, to visit with a parrot that was across the street. An old lady had a parrot.
Oh.
But those are just the things I remember of that. And we went back then to Iowa. I think the folks were kind of homesick. And
did you go back to the farm then in Albia? Or?
Yes, we went back to Monroe County Farm. But it was leased out. We went to another place first, and I think I started a school there. They let me go a little bit. Mm-hmm. But it was just a month or so in the spring. I don't remember much about that. And then I went to this rural school for a year, about almost 2 years. And then we moved to the county seat. Mm-hmm. And that fall then, when we moved, I entered 3rd grade. I'd never been in 2nd grade at all, but I didn't have any records, and I knew this stuff. You know? Kids know, kind of.
Right.
But I felt that I was willing to try it, and they didn't question it. And the only thing I can remember was Miss Kizik would reel off addition and subtraction and a whole reel of, and you have to try to keep up with her in mental arithmetic. And I was puzzled about that for a little while, but that was about the only thing that bothered me. She was nice. She had the straightest back of anyone I ever saw. A real quick moving person. She got promoted with me that year. I had her for 2 years. And I used to go back from here and visit with her.
Did she
have
inspire
tea with
you
her.
to be a teacher? Was it her example?
No, I don't think she did particularly. But that was one thing I always wanted to do. I'd get the neighborhood kids together and we'd play school. And I just always wanted to teach. But I really spent enough years in it.
Yeah, well, you started, what, at 17?
Yeah, I was 17. I went to the county schools, and first we lived in the elder edition, which had small houses, and finally, after another child was born, my father built a nice house on 5 acres.
So you were the oldest, is that right?
No, I had a brother 5 years older.
Oh.
But he never paid much attention to me. Well, he did in lots of our play too, but he was quite athletic at that time and played with the boys around, you know. 5 years makes quite a bit of difference.
Does. Yeah.
And I had a sister a year and 11 months younger than I. And then I had this little brother then. So we lived there. My dad built this nice home and on this 5 acres. And of course it was about a 2-mile walk to high school. Mm-hmm. That's what we did. And to junior high as well, because the junior high took up the old high school building upstairs. And downstairs they had 4 grades. It was a pretty good sized building. And strange as it may seem, I taught in Washington School first, 3rd grade. No, first I taught in a rural school. Mm-hmm. Simply because the county superintendent, I'd been out, I graduated at 16. I was skipped in grades and so on. Right. And graduated
Well, you went from
Young.
first to third
Yeah.
grade.
And then when we were when we were living on this place east of town there a little ways, I went to junior high, and of course I loved that.
Mhm.
But they were so crowded in that upstairs at the high school that they picked out about 40 children to go on to high school if we could double up on classes.
Mhm.
So we did. And not everybody went on because the mothers and fathers had better sense than my people. But I went on, and then I entered high school when I was 13. So, and then I finished in 3 years and a half. So, school was never a problem really.
Mhm.
I wasn't a top student, but it was never a problem really. And when I was in high school, we had normal training.
Mhm.
And the woman who did that was from the Teachers College, and we learned quite a bit about how to teach rural schools
Mhm.
because they were so common. Just
Right.
every intersection of county in the county almost had a little schoolhouse, and so they had us go out to the grade schools, and there were 4 grade schools, and observe children,
Mhm.
work with them, and meet their teachers and learn something about it, but I didn't know much about teaching when you
Sure.
come down.
Sure.
But the county superintendent had a problem. One of her teachers was having to take care of her mother who was dying of cancer.
Mhm.
So she called and asked if I wouldn't go out there for a while.
Mhm.
And so I went out to this rural school, and the mother didn't die till after school was over,
Oh,
so
my
I
goodness.
finished 6 months
Yeah.
there.
So
That's
was
when
it
I was 17.
First through 8th? Was this the first through 8th, or?
Yeah, but I was just a
How
youngster with the rest of
Yeah.
them.
How many students did you have?
I had about 18, I
Ooh.
think, and I had all but 2 grades, as I remember.
Yeah.
There was a girl who was older than I in the school in 8th grade, and one boy that was, I imagine he was about my age. But we got along quite well, and you had to board with it out in the country.
Uh-huh.
I had first grade, I remember I had twins in that grade,
Mhm.
little tiny children.
Uh-huh.
But I finished that year, and then I was to teach at a rural school, and at that time I was to be paid $125 a month, which was fabulous.
Yeah.
But I was a little bit afraid of it. It was they had a lot of rough boys
Mhm.
who enjoyed the idea of running a teacher out
Mhm.
and so on. You know.
Right.
And there I was, just a little kid.
Right. Right.
So when they asked me to teach in county schools, so I went right from there to third grade teacher in Washington Building where I'd gone to school. And the advantage of that was that we were supervised
Mhm.
by a woman who had taught 25 years. And Charlotte I knew her well,
Uh-huh.
and it was really to my advantage and learning
Right.
to work under someone like
Kind
that.
of like a master teacher and then a teacher.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good system.
And then the next year they put 3 of us girls who had graduated from high school into first grade,
Mm-hmm.
and she supervised. She helped us plan and
Yeah.
everything. So I did that, and then went to summer schools, starting my education.
Uh-huh. Up at the university, at the State University,
I went to the State Teachers College the first year,
which was
Cedar Falls.
Cedar Falls. Right. There's still a college.
Yes, they don't call it that
Yeah,
anymore, you know.
Right, like Western
But,
State.
yes.
Don't call the normal school.
Mhm. But I went there for 3 summers. So
Mhm.
I had 1 year when I went to the university.
Okay.
And I had 1 year and 5 years of experience, you see.
Right.
So I wasn't a child when I went to the university. I was quite a mature person.
It seems like that's the best time
Well,
to learn and to also with your
well,
experience.
I think I did have the advantage. I always will feel that I learned more from all of these experienced people. And when I did go to the teachers' college, they had some wonderful teachers there. And one of them tried to get me transferred to the art department. It was a 3-year course, and I could get a certificate in a 2-year course. And I felt, oh, I can't go another year, you know. I didn't change. I wasn't that much involved in art, but she liked my work and liked me. Then there was shortage of teachers in Iowa, very much so at that time. And
Was this would have been like the 1920s, wouldn't it?
yes, it was in the 20s. So the state waived tuition and gave us a waiver on our tuition if we'd go in. And so I looked at all the different catalogs. And the University of Iowa had a course in Bachelor of Science in School Supervision. And I felt that all of my courses would count that I'd had at the teachers' college. I could transfer everything. And I could prepare myself to supervise student teachers, to supervise regular teachers, or be a principal. I never, then coming here, I never had that opportunity because they chose other people for principal there, not I. But I had the training for
So you came to Gunnison in 1927, right?
Yes, I had graduated from the university. I had taught half-time while I was at Iowa City. I taught kindergarten. They were short of a teacher one year. And I met one of their principal that summer. And I was quite involved working in the library and doing other things. But he came and asked if I wouldn't come out and teach half-time kindergarten. So I transferred my courses to the morning and went out there and taught. And that was added experience too, you know. But
now, it was Dr. Ruland who hired you to come out here, is that right?
well, yes, but I had been, after I graduated that summer, I think it was right in the middle of the summer, Dr. Studebaker, who's the superintendent of the Denver schools, came back there. And they called us, 3 or 4 of us, in for interviews. And Dean Kay's daughter, he was dean of the liberal arts school, Marjorie and I and Elizabeth Evans were all accepted in Denver. But I hadn't signed for, my contract hadn't come yet to me. So I got this call one afternoon from Dr. Ruland here. And it was quite a surprise, of course, because I didn't even know Gunnison was on the map.
Right.
I knew Denver was on the map.
Right. That was the Wild West.
Yes.
What was Gunnison?
Right. So anyway, he called.
Now, was he at the college at Western?
He was superintendent of the Gunnison schools, but he taught some classes at the college. And he later, 2 years later, went up there full time. But he'd lived here a long time. He'd been superintendent of schools here a long time. How they had decided on me and employed me sight unseen was through this woman who was my supervisor, had gone to Iowa City to finish her college education. Cora Bruns had gone from Western State here to finish her education, and they had met there. And apparently Charlotte had told Cora about me. Cora told Ruland about me.
So he called you.
And I had a job. I never had to apply for any job in my life. It's funny, but I didn't.
So you came into Gunnison on the narrow gauge, right?
Yes.
What was your first impression of Gunnison?
Well, of course I was disappointed. I really didn't know a thing about the locality, except that it was they said at that time 7,800 feet or something, you know.
Yeah.
And the music teacher, who was a close friend of mine in Albia schools at that time, her grandmother said, "Oh, don't go to Gunnison. You freeze to death there." She had been a girl from Nebraska and had gone to boarding school in Denver. And she met Sally Tapscott from Gunnison. And Sally invited her home for a Christmas vacation. And she said it was the coldest place on earth. Well, that didn't deter me. I'd accept
You were
it.
from Iowa, after all. I mean,
Yeah,
Iowa's not
I was-
hot.
no, it was cold in Iowa many times.
Yeah.
No, and it was the first time I'd ever taken although Iowa had railroads all over, you know, but to go on a Pullman
Mhm.
and come to Denver and then to Gunnison, Salida and Gunnison was the first time I'd ever been on a cross-country railroad.
Mhm.
And I had the most pleasant trip on the Burlington Railroad. We were on the Burlington main line, you know. Albia's one of the stops. And there was a woman, and Mrs. Rose from La Jolla, California, and her daughter were returning from a trip to Europe. And then there was a little girl from Chicago there, and there was a college boy who was returning from a trip to Europe. And there were two salesmen, and coming across Nebraska, the Dempsey-Tooney fight was on.
Oh.
And they set up in the car, in the parlor car, radio, and the squawking, noisy things, you know. I wasn't interested in the fight. But it seemed that the people were all such convivial sort of mood. And it was a nice trip. Then I got to Salida, and of course had to stay all night there. And the clouds were black and dark, and Salida's kind of a
Was this
tied-in place.
August or September?
It was September.
Yeah.
They, at that time, a college, the public school started with the college. And they weren't going to start till October, about the first week of October. They were doing this so that the rural boys could help put up hay.
Right.
You know those things.
Yeah.
But I didn't
Yeah.
know that. So it was kind of late, and the trees were beautiful. But that night it was kind of, I doubted my wisdom in coming, maybe. But the next day, we drove through those beautiful groves of aspen and everything on the train. Train didn't travel very fast, you know.
Yeah.
But as we started down, I expected Gunnison, that high, to be a regular Swiss village.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing like it. It became more farmland or pastures and cattle and things like that. And when we got to Gunnison, the railroad yards, we went through the yards, and there were these little cars of coal, just like I would see in my own county in Iowa, because it was a coal mining county originally.
Right.
At least the part of it was. But I got off the Levita Hotel, and of course I didn't pay much attention to. I knew it was a big building, but I didn't pay much attention to it, you know. I was looking for a taxi. No taxi. I went in and tried to call. We couldn't get the telephone to operate, and the fellow hadn't rung it. You had to ring it under the counter. Then I went back out and I found the man from this tall building, the Gunnison Hotel was then. And he said he'd take me to Lake's house where I was to live.
Oh, I see. You were going to
So
live
it was
with
right
the
up the
Lakes.
street
Oh.
here,
Oh.
next block.
Yeah.
But she had sent her husband down, Henry,
Uh-huh.
to pick me up. Well, how would I know what Henry was?
Right.
Or Henry
And
me.
he didn't know you either, huh?
No. I didn't like the to be surrounded by mountains particularly, first. I felt closed in, sort of.
Yeah.
And it took about 6 weeks. One night we were driving up from the west. We'd been down along the river. And driving into town, and it was about one of those gorgeous sunsets. And it was the mountains were all livid. And it was then that I decided I liked mountains. But when people are raised in flat lands, now we had some high hills in Iowa.
Right.
But
Yeah,
it was
you have a
different.
Pikes Peak in Iowa, actually.
No.
But it's not our Pikes Peak, but
No.
there's a place called Pikes Peak, Iowa.
Yeah.
It's a very,
Well,
it's not very big.
We had the worst hill out near my grandfather's farm there. They called it Bunker Hill.
Uh-huh.
And when the early cars came out, they would bring them out there and see if they could climb the hill with the gas would feed.
Uh-huh.
And it wouldn't. Then they'd have to back down, and they could back up the hill because it was
Yes.
would feed that
Yeah,
way.
right.
And they'd try out those little
Right.
early Fords and everything on that hill.
I guess that's how they got out of Escalante Canyon originally.
Yes,
Was
I
to
think.
back the cars
Yeah,
out
oh,
because they
yes.
wouldn't go forward.
They
You had
couldn't,
to
no.
back them out.
The gas just wouldn't go the motor.
Yeah, that seems funny. Huh?
It's those things, the mechanical things and the inventive things that have come since are just, there were very few cars, you know, when I came out
Right.
here. The ranchers, a lot of the ranchers had cars,
Uh-huh.
but they were those older cars that took a lot of care,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw more wagons,
Mm-hmm.
and they fed their hay from
Uh-huh.
hay racks, and they had the stackers were the old wooden kind. I'd seen those in Iowa plenty of
Uh-huh.
times, you know. But
And the streets weren't paved, were they? In Gunnison
oh
in
goodness, no, they
1927?
weren't. That was one of the big problems. I think Gunnison was dusty,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd have those storms, windstorms,
Mhm.
when we'd say Utah was blowing in, and really, the sky would just be full of dirt, and the streets were not paved. My brother-in-law, let's see, we owned the store from 1930. Don and I were married,
Yeah.
1930.
December 25th, right?
Yeah, Christmas
yeah,
Day.
Yeah.
And then they bought the store, and Milton was on the council for a number of years after that.
Mhm.
And his job was street maintenance.
Oh,
And people used to come in the spring and just, they'd tie into him because the city hadn't done anything about those holes in the street. And there were mud holes.
Yeah.
They were terrible.
yeah.
And property was not taken care of very well sometimes. I actually took a scythe, you know what they are, a great
Uh-huh.
big scythe.
Right.
And I went across and cleared the parking at the courthouse over here
Yeah.
because it was weeds that were waist high.
Yeah.
No one cut weeds,
Yeah.
and no one worried very much about a lot of things
Uh-huh.
like that.
Yeah.
It took, I imagine 5 years later, things were being well cared for.
Oh, okay. So that would be in the early 30s.
Yeah, well, it would maybe be, yes it was. It was, they even had the Gunnison beautification, and that was in the early 40s.
Okay. What
And-
turned it around, do you think?
I don't know. I think just people just decided that the town looked bad.
Uh-huh.
The first paved street, we call it paved, oiled
Uh-huh.
street, was this one right around, this walk just around the courthouse
Okay.
and up at the college.
Yeah.
And that was done, well, let's see. It was done in 1950, I think.
Oh.
About
But the
1950.
highway was paved, wasn't it? Or not?
It was done at about the same time.
Oh, my goodness.
One of the biggest problems wasn't just the town streets, but the rural roads were graveled.
Uh-huh.
And between here and the twin bridges down there were always, in the spring, big mud boils. And they were having those in Wisconsin
Uh-huh.
and Minnesota because Lake's oldest son was a highway engineer up there.
Oh.
And they were having trouble with them. And no matter how much they put in as ballast under there, they still had trouble.
Oh.
The frost would come up,
Oh,
and
okay.
it would just boil out, and you'd
Yeah,
have a big mud
yeah,
hole.
yeah.
So that
Because it was so cold in the winter, huh?
yes. So
Yeah,
the frost
yeah.
would go so deep down in
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
and there was a lot of moisture. That was near
Well,
the
sure,
river and different
right.
places.
And the river probably
Any
flooded a
place,
lot too.
any
huh?
place where there was a lot of moisture, you
Yeah.
had bad roads. They tried draining, digging those deep ditches on either
Mhm.
side, and they're still there. Everything.
Yeah.
But there was nothing
Yeah, right.
until they capped the roads that did that. But I think the capping, finally, they must have held enough heat.
This should be just going along. So it held enough heat.
A heat that it didn't do that. So roads began to improve, but it was a long time before
I'll say.
streets in town were
1950,
paved, you know.
yeah.
Yes. No, it was later than that.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was in the 60s before
Yeah.
our streets here and the alleys were finished. I haven't any,
No, I think
Really?
that I'm sure that's right because I
I
know
haven't any
I've heard
information
people
on it, but I'm just sure of that.
talk about coming to Gunnison in the 60s to teach at the college and seeing the streets weren't paved. You
Mhm.
know? Well, what about your job? How was your job? What was your job when you first came?
Well, I taught first grade, was a first grade critic teacher. And I knew I was to have a lot of student teachers because they said they were bringing them back. The teachers were coming back
Mhm.
to qualify by getting their student teaching in. And they were also, I was to teach in the college in the
Mhm.
summers for those teachers who were coming back. And I was to teach methods classes. It varied each summer.
Uh-huh.
I had methods in reading and the language arts, and storytelling and
Uh-huh.
kindergarten methods and illustrative teaching, and
Uh-huh.
children's lit, all of that I
Yeah.
taught because I taught a number of summers there.
Mhm.
But
And you taught at Blackstocks. That was the school, right?
yeah, that was the Blackstock was the
Yeah.
only building.
Right.
It was only 1 year old then. You see, it was
Oh.
built started in the spring of '26, and so they had used it that spring.
Yeah.
And I came in the fall of '27.
Oh, I bet it was
And
a nice
each,
building inside
it
there,
was.
wasn't it? Yeah.
There were 6 grades in kindergarten in the music room. And you see, the rural schools were all around.
Mhm.
And so we didn't get influx of children
Right,
from there.
right.
But my first year, I had 42 first graders, and I had 10 student teachers. The teachers came 1 hour a day for certain days,
Mhm.
and we had a classroom off of, they're now combined, they took out the walls.
Uh-huh.
But we had one classroom off of our room, so we could have 2 station teachers going at the same time, sometimes 3.
Yeah.
And the next year,
42 students, though. Those-
well, the next year was worse.
Oh, no.
I went the first day and I had 55 first graders. No one anticipated anything like that. Mr. Ruland had gone up to the college, and so we had a new superintendent by the name of Reed. I've never forgotten him. Well, I taught Cora Bruns, being ahead of the primary education training school up there. And she worked with the state on the Colorado Reading Circle. They selected books, and she was very active, and she was a good person and quite knowledgeable. So she said, well, I had that 55 children, I hadn't even seating for them hardly. And she said, well, they'll have to get you some help. She used to come down the year before quite often to the building, and she wasn't paid to do it, but she did a supervisory sort of thing sometimes. And she encouraged them to come up to her library up there in Taylor Hall for children to come even there to get books because there was no library.
Right.
Well, anyway, no one seemed to be very excited about 55 children except me. And I told them I had to have some help. So I understood that they had been looking for someone. Mr. Jorgensen was on the board, and judge and nurse, lawyer, and I can't remember who else. and they were looking for someone. But teachers were rather hard to pick up. So after I'd had them at least 5 weeks, they told me that a girl from Iowa was coming. She had gone to the Teachers College in Cedar Falls, where I'd gone to school, and was coming that weekend. And I thought, oh, wonderful. We'll divide them, and maybe Miss Bruns thought I could teach the reading and the language arts and let her take some of the other subject matter, you know. Well, in the middle of the night, I thought about that. And I thought, my goodness, I arrived down at that depot, and no one met me, so I better meet this girl. Because I knew that this Dr. Reed was to be in Grand Junction that weekend. I don't know why or what. But I got a car lined up, and somebody took me down, and I picked her up. And she was a nice young person, about my age, or a little younger, and we went to lunch, and we spent the afternoon together, very amiably. So I expected her to show up Monday morning, but when I went to school, she didn't show up. So about an hour after school started, Cora Bruns came to my door, and she was actually shedding tears. And she had been called by Dr. Reed to come down to his office. And he told her she had no reason for being on that school grounds in any time for any reason. She was not to dictate any policies or any arrangements. And she hadn't dictated any. She was not to talk to me about my classroom or anything. And he wanted to talk to me. Well, I left 55 children in the room, went down to see what Dr. Reed wanted. And he said I had no right to meet the girl. He'd arranged for someone to meet her, and that I was out of order. And he got out his book that he'd written, and it said that he showed me the line of chain of command from superintendent down to teacher, maybe to the janitor too. Well,
My goodness.
I told the man, I said, I'm not interested in your book nor your chain of command. I was doing what was common courtesy.
Right.
And I said I would do it with anyone that would be coming.
Yeah.
I did not tell the girl what she was to teach or anything.
Yeah.
Okay, next day, well, I guess by the afternoon, here came the man's wife with the girl in tow. And they took chairs in the back of the room. They watched me teach. The next day, they again took chairs in the back of the room and watched me teach. And the third day, I was about to scream. The girl just told them she was through. And she went over and told the school board they have to give her her fare back to Iowa, which they were glad to do, and they did. So I still had 55 children. No help. When I hear teachers complain today, you can say, well, I don't say anything.
55. First grade. The most important grade.
Yeah, and some of them were repeaters. There were children from age 8 down, a few.
Uh-huh.
But there'd been a sawmill move in, and a few of those children were the kind that hadn't had a chance. They drifted from one job to another and so on, one area to another.
Yeah.
Well, finally they got a girl from Denver and gave her 20 of the children, and we moved them she moved them from the little classroom to the kindergarten, which didn't meet in the afternoon, and back and forth. But I had nothing to say about those 20. But after that, I had large grades, usually near 40,
Uh-huh.
always.
Uh-huh.
And it was just to be expected that we have that many. It was hard to seat them. I have a few of my first graders around today. Ann Ellen
Oh, yeah.
was one, and
Yeah. Oh,
Clinton
okay.
Spencer was
Yeah.
one, and well, there's quite a few of them around. Then I taught at the college there in the summers, and I enjoyed that. I usually taught just the first half of the summer session and so on.
But then, now, when you got married, then in 19...
I lost the job.
Yeah, because you were married, right?
A single person had to have the job. I did teach the kindergarten the next year.
Oh, okay.
But it just was in the spring and fall.
Yeah. And you'd think with
the salary,
a shortage of teachers,
yes,
that they would
but the salary situation, I was making $720 a year in Iowa. 9 months, $80 a month. I came out here, and I was the basic salary at the start was $1,800, and then I was given extra for teaching in the summer school at the college. So naturally, I was glad I was able to finish school when I did and come out here. But I did not. I did quite a bit of substituting through a few years there because there weren't many people around who could just step into a first grade, on their grade, and I'd had enough experience I could do it. But
tell me about when you got interested in starting the library.
Well, that was my association in AAUW.
Oh, all right.
Yes, AAUW was, I was considered a charter member, although their charter really was signed in the spring. But I attended their first meetings that fall. And
so that would be 1927.
Yes, 27 and 8.
AAUW since 1927.
Yes.
Yeah,
I belonged to this branch all the time.
Yeah.
I've been an honorary member now for about 13 years, and I don't go anymore.
Yeah.
I've just had so many meetings in my life.
Right.
You reach a point where enough's enough.
Right.
And I've been a state officer and everything. No, AAUW, about the middle of the 30s, I'd say 1935, we were talking about a library. And Dr. Borland was very active in AAUW. And there were libraries downtown. There were rental shelves. And there had been rental shelves and different types of libraries. But I would say that the people living here had good libraries in their homes. Lots of them did. The people that settled in Gunnison were above average when it came to education. The first people.
I mean, the county is still.
There were a lot of railroad people, perhaps, that would not qualify in that. But a railroad man worked at a place and then moved on to another area, and he was shifted by his line wherever they needed him.
Right.
But as a whole, I was surprised. There were not in my. I guess when I first came, there was too. Several women's clubs. There was the Monday Afternoon Club, the Isabel Tourist Club, and the Gunnison Women's Club. 3 big clubs. And I hope to try to write up some of that. I have it for the library this winter. And each one, they had really like study. Many of these people that belonged were like graduates of college. But many of them were young women that hadn't had the opportunity because they were out here without a school. Or they went up to the normal school when they had it, So anyway, they had those clubs going. And I'm sure they had lots of good background material to study. Then they, when Mrs. Casey, wife of the president, came just about shortly after I came. The one that came with the year I came didn't hold the job long. They didn't. Okay. So Casey was the next president. And I was a young married person then when he came. And she organized, had them all go as a federated women's club. And they all went together then. But prior to that, they were more on the study nature. And they did do some very nice things for the schools. When I returned to teaching 13 years later, the women's club was very active, and they had what they called hobby shows at Webster Hall. And children could present their collections, their work, their writing. Creative writing was one of our specialties that we presented. And different children would get blue ribbons for their work. And it was nice.
Yeah.
Because it did encourage children to reach out and do something a little more than they were getting in the classroom.
Yeah.
And of course teachers cooperated, some of the teachers pretty well with that program. But as far as the people of the town, they always supported the schools quite well, I thought.
They still do, don't they? I mean,
Well,
to build a classroom is,
Yes.
at least that's a...
I think that right now we have, I don't want to criticize them at all. They have their ideas. And I feel they are, we have gone through 2 or 3 stages, say, of people, generations of people. Each generation has a different background. Each generation has a different objectives. And they say the children are hard to teach now. Well, maybe television and parents aren't doing the job.
Right.
I won't say
Yeah.
something isn't doing the job.
Right. There's some, for whatever reason, kids are not getting the parenting. I mean, sometimes it's economic reasons that both
In
parents
those
have
first
to work.
days, the
I know.
mother was the housewife
Yeah, right.
when I
Which
came.
had a real advantage.
And the mothers
Especially for
visited
the
schools.
children.
Yes.
Yes.
I think children are more self-sufficient, whether that's good or bad. One time I was walking to City Market a couple or 3 years ago, and it was the first to school, and there by the fence right down there was a tiny little girl, just kind of hugging the fence in the corner there by the sidewalk. And I stopped and talked with her, and she'd started to kindergarten that day. And I said, well, why are you here? There wasn't another child around. And it was noon hour, and I didn't see anyone. And she said, oh, I'm here. My babysitter will be after me pretty soon. She said she's probably had something happen.
Yeah.
And I thought, there that little doll of a child was expecting someone else to take care of her. It wasn't the mother, it wasn't the father.
Right.
And I do think children they're worldly wise, they're more self-sufficient, but I think there's less that interests them in a continuity. Now, we did a program one time up at the college just to illustrate. It was during I'd say about 1964 or 5. And we had studied, I had 3rd grade and 4th grade, and I had lots of times practically 40 children. I had 3rd grade children learn local history and campus history, about when the buildings were built and a few things. And the others, 4th grade, studied Colorado history. So we combined, they illustrated and they used the tape recorder and got their speeches ready, and then we ran these long strips of their pictures through the opaque projector. And the parents were there as a program. And I felt that parents never understood that. They didn't understand how much work each child had put into it, or a group of children had put into it. And that's quite a while ago.
Yeah.
But was it because the parents were young, or were disinterested in that sort of thing? I don't know. Maybe they appreciated it more than I thought. Of course, we had to sit in a dark room. But we used what facilities the college had. And did a number of
But you sort of get a feel for those things. I mean, if you felt that they didn't appreciate it, maybe they didn't.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
because
had
you
the
do
feel.
have it, because if somebody does, then you know it. They, oh,
Yes.
this is wonderful, this is so great, thank you so much. You know,
Well,
Johnny learned this.
Well, I was still up there toward the last. One day, first day of school, a little girl bounced in and looked around. Well, my mother wished I'd get a pretty teacher this year. She met someone that was young, someone was fresh, sure. But the child didn't seem to stick with that idea very long.
Yes. She said,
But, you see-
she was forthright. At least you knew where she was coming from, right, all the time.
But schools have changed. The population has changed. The town has changed.
Yeah. And the country's changed, too.
When I first came, this was cattle country, you know.
Right.
And they were begging for tourism practically because there was no industry here, very little. And I enjoyed seeing the big herds of cattle being driven down. Once in a while they had to be driven right through the town practically. But we enjoyed that. Now they're all trucked, and there's about a third of the cattle that used to be here. But it was cattle country. And those people would come to town on Saturday night, and we were supposed to close our store at 10 o'clock. They'd drive in and they'd visit on the street. It was just old hometown week, you know. And they enjoyed it. And about closing time, then they'd all burst in and want to start shopping.
Right.
So we usually were late getting out. Those were long days.
I'll say.
But I think people were closer in a way. Even the business community was closer to the ranch people than they are today. I'm sure of that, because we had a credit business,
Right.
and I was the bookkeeper.
Yeah,
I would be
right.
there for a long time,
Right.
and people would pay. Ranchers would pay when they sold their cattle or sold their hay.
Right.
People over on Powderhorn had a little store over there, but they couldn't manage to. Our store would buy extra cases of everything and keep for them, and then just sell them to them, you know. But I think a lot of that, people knew each other more than they do today. That was true.
Yeah. And they had more time, ironically.
I think they did.
Even though they worked so hard.
They
still had more
they
time.
worked hard, but they made
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
for visiting.
Yeah.
And today, people get involved in activities more.
Yes.
I remember when the first 4-H started, and I always felt that this was ironic almost, because they always would go, when the committee would meet, and I was on many committees, they'd always say, well, who's going to get the business section for money? And it was always the businessman. And when they first started 4-H, it wasn't the ranchman whose children were in that set it up. There were a few of them, sure. But it was mostly, they'd go down the street and get
That hasn't
money from the
changed,
business
has it?
community.
They still, anything anybody wants to do, they go to the business
Yes, they do.
community.
And in the, maybe the business community does better today, but in those days, groceries, for instance, were by the home-owned stores, and that's all we had for a while. You would make 3 or 4 cents on a can of stuff, and you had to handle that can. You had to box it and sack it and mark it and everything. And
That's true.
coffee was only 20 cents, 25 cents a pound, and things were less expensive. But you had to do a great deal more handling of food stuff.
Right.
And it was limited too. We could not have as much fresh produce. That was almost impossible.
Yeah, sure.
It would freeze on the train in and
Sure,
the trucks in. And it wasn't a happy marketing situation many times. But it's changed. And now we just go into, we have foods from South America, and all over the world
Yeah,
practically.
Yeah, grapes from Chile in the
Yeah.
winter. I know.
We have them all winter
I know.
long.
I know.
And both markets.
Yeah.
And, well, coming of the airplane,
Yeah.
that changed that.
Yeah.
Because before that they couldn't handle them.
Yeah.
Your refrigeration cars, I've watched them down in the west, down at Grand Junction, when those big refrigeration cars used to be filled with tomatoes
Yeah.
and things, and those packers would come from Texas, and
Yeah.
one woman packed tomatoes there. They were green, you know,
Uh-huh.
kind of, but she packed them in those boxes, and you could hardly see her hands. She moved so fast,
Yeah.
and they were paid so much by a
Yeah.
box.
Yeah.
That was a man by the name of Hogg and his wife.
Yeah.
I haven't forgotten their names because they did come up here and vacation up here. But they were experts at that type of thing, you know.
Well,
But our whole town, well, the world has changed.
yeah, it has.
And I think
Yeah.
it's a mistake if people can't change somewhat with the
Mhm.
world. There are people at Gunnison that haven't changed.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can't live in a modern world and not change.
Right. It's hard. You see things. I mean, it wasn't until the Vietnam War that we ever saw a war on television. But
That's right.
it changes your whole perspective.
Well, when we, about 1950, Gail Allen lived next door.
Oh, yeah.
He's the one that brought the television in.
Yeah.
And he knew everything about
Yeah.
electricity.
Yeah.
We used to go over on our acreage over there, and he had a little trailer. And we'd go over and watch it. And he was trying to bounce it from mountain to
Uh-huh.
mountain and get it
Yeah.
in here.
Yeah.
It was snowy, but that was the first
Yeah.
television I
Right.
ever saw.
Right.
It was right there.
Yeah.
But, well,
It's probably one of those 10-inch or 9-inch.
well, he had a pretty good
Big one,
screen.
huh? Oh, okay.
Yes. He brought in pretty good equipment.
Yeah.
And it wasn't too long until they worked out the booster system, you know.
Yeah.
But I
Which
remember.
made a big difference.
But when I was at the
Yeah.
University of Iowa, there were 2 graduate students there one night and a couple of us gals, and we had earphones, and they had made crystal sets
Uh-huh.
of radio.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
we'd never
very
had
sweet.
radio
Yeah,
until then.
That's right. That's right.
Radio
That's right.
and
So
television.
That's right. So you've seen radio, television, VCRs, computers.
Yes,
I know.
all of this.
I know all of it. And it's like Thoreau said, you gain something, but you lose something.
Oh, yes.
You know, it's.
Um,
Now, can we get back to the library? The night when you first started the library?
Oh, yes, we have to get back
Yes, we
to that.
do.
Well, Dr. Borland very much, and Arla Walker very much wanted to have a library established here.
Uh-huh.
And the whole group was active in it.
Mhm.
And when Mrs. Sullivan, she was the first president here, lived over where Blackstock Store is now.
Uh-huh.
That was her house. And we had the theater, which was downtown, gave a book matinees and things that way.
Okay.
They let us bring in George Arliss pictures and pictures that wouldn't be popular.
Uh-huh.
We sold tickets on those, and they gave us almost the whole thing
Oh.
except the expenses.
Uh-huh.
And we did a lot that way, and there were 40 boxes of books delivered from the theater to Mrs. Sullivan's front porch after that book matinee. And so we did a great deal of collecting.
Now these books were donations.
Yeah,
People
just
brought in.
donations.
Oh, okay.
But they were all types.
Yeah.
But there was a pretty good nucleus
Mhm.
for a library.
Uh-huh.
And in 1938, that was when we decided we just had to put those books somewhere. So we had the books then. And they had built on Blackstock School those basement rooms,
Mhm.
and the one that's on the basement on this corner was to be a library for the school. So Thurston Hatch was principal down there, and he said, well, put your books in this library.
Uh-huh.
But they had too many children that year, so we didn't use it. But Webster Hall was being built.
Okay.
And so we took which was to be the Boy Scout room, really,
Uh-huh. The
downstairs.
basement. where
And
it
you
was
know that
probably when I came
our
in
library was
72.
there for 30 years.
Yeah, right. I remember when it was there.
And we did use a back room, and
Yeah.
we had all
Yeah.
kinds of problems there.
Yeah.
It wasn't good.
No.
But,
It was better than not having a
oh,
library.
absolutely.
Yeah.
One time we painted the floor with paint that one of the women just, when that first paint came out, that wasn't oil paint.
Uh-huh.
And so we painted the floor, and then it peeled. And I actually scraped, that was in the early 60s.
Uh-huh.
I scraped that whole floor with a scraper. It wouldn't dry because they used oil mops on concrete. And no one here was selling carpets much at the time, you know. That's what we should have had.
Yeah.
Clean the floor and put carpet down.
Yeah.
But I painted all the shelving and all that in 1960. But our goal was to have a building.
Mm-hmm.
The building that's across, that's an insurance office, was offered for only $9,000, and almost bought that. And Mr. Jorgensen bought it. It had been the Christian
Now,
Science Church.
Oh, okay. Were you on the library board then, or you had started a library board? Did you have a library
No
board?
no one wanted us.
Just go ahead and talk, because
Yes.
this is picking it up.
No one really wanted us. We tried to get the town interested, the town council.
Uh-huh.
We tried to get the commissioners, but it meant money. They would give us enough for magazines and books, you know,
Yeah.
but not for a library.
Yeah.
And even Arla Walker wrote to Denver, to the State Department of Education, when they discontinued the office of County Superintendent of Schools.
Uh-huh.
And she tried to get, and that money would come into the county, but there'd be no one in the job for 2 years.
Oh.
And she tried to get that salary even
Yeah.
to go to a library. They wouldn't let her have it. Well, it just went on and on. And then the government, of course, was involved in these Title II business.
Uh-huh.
And we knew different institutions was getting money from
Uh-huh.
it. But no one wanted to stick their neck out and do it,
Yeah.
even tackle the thought
Yeah.
of it. So after my husband died, I found Webster Hall Library was open, and they were redoing the upstairs. And people were just walking in and out of there at will. The minister had the key and of the community church, but he didn't want anything to do with the library. So I went down and asked him for the keys, and I got the keys.
Yeah.
So that's when I assumed the responsibility.
Okay. What year was that?
1960.
Oh, okay.
And so right after that, the county commissioners one time told me then, well, you name a board, Ann. Well, I couldn't even get people to go on a board. I was on the Webster Hall board then.
Uh-huh.
It was a lay board that was kind of trying to have youth activities there and take care of the building.
Mm-hmm.
I was on that 7 years. So anyway, I did finally name enough women to the board.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Borland was one, of course, but she was in very much failing health.
Mm-hmm.
She died in 2 years' time after that. And
So it was like an honorary
it was
position.
more honorary.
Yeah.
Our first librarian had an 8th grade education.
Oh my goodness.
She lived right across here.
Yeah.
We only paid her minimum, I don't remember what it was, nothing much. But she went down a couple of days a week.
Yeah.
And it just went on. Then we were fortunate enough to get someone after the county finally said, name a board, and I did. And I wasn't president of the board, I was treasurer for so long. And after that, we had people that were quite interested in seeing the thing develop.
Mm-hmm.
County commissioners weren't averse to seeing the thing develop, but they didn't want the responsibility, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And so after Title II funds were almost through the first series of those, I said, we have to do something.
Yeah.
So I just kept pushing and pushing. Even my board was obstinate. and wasn't one of them that would go on the building committee. I named the building committee and everything. And some was from friends of the library, and some were good and some were bad, you know.
Right.
But it was just had to happen.
And so what year was this? This would be...
It was about 1971,
oh my goodness, okay.
along there.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but we'd had a lot of public meetings before that.
Right.
And just work toward it, you know.
How can people be opposed to a library? I mean,
They're not opposed to it, but they don't want to do it.
On the line. That's right.
They just, it was quite a responsibility, of course. Well, anyhow, we did get the initial building then. And, but I walked the streets for 2 winters there, collecting money. I thought we'd get enough to get matching funds. And we had our plans drawn by this architect from Denver. And we just were short money yet. We just didn't have enough. Personally, I'd collected $25,000, but we had to have $45,000. So anyway, we had to defer it until the next year. But by that time, we were still short toward the last. We were afraid to start the thing without a little edge. You just can't do it. Well, anyway, the state librarian was talking to a man in Denver who was a government man, and he was in charge of poverty grants to the Four Corners area. And those poverty grants weren't picked up. They didn't get interested in doing anything or applying for it. And so he told this librarian, he says, well, there's plenty of money in that fund. We'll just give them whatever they need. So anyway,
we're almost Four Corners. Only 6 hours away.
They sent the applications over, and the person who filled them out was on the library board and didn't even send back the first page, and so that was deferred. And finally, the man called me, and I said, well, come on over and I'll give you your lunch, and we'll rewrite the application. So he came on the plane, and we sat here and ate lunch, and he told me about his family. He's a real nice man. And we worked out all the details. So then we were to get 10,000 more. And that put us over so we could build. And we'd picked up a little more. But I had people who went out to collect. And from some of our professional people on downtown, doctors, lawyers, so forth, they'd maybe get $10 or something like that. And when it comes to building a building, it doesn't go very far. One woman with the ranch community, she called me and she knew me real well. She'd been a teacher, and she said, oh, Ann, she says, I went out all afternoon and I've got a little for books but nothing for the building. She said, I've got $4 and something. But that's the way it was. It was tough going.
I'll say.
Just tough going to get the money together that you could count on. But most of the people, I will say that Bonnie and a man that was on the library board, he taught at the college, did do a good job. But we had to, most of those would give $100, but they give it in pieces.
Right, like people did with the nursing home. I can remember when the nursing home came around and said, would you donate so much a month?
Yes, and they did.
Yeah.
So the college did real well. Public school teachers didn't do much for us. But anyway, we were able to build with a little edge of money. Enough that when it came, we had, then I built a storage building at the back, you remember? And I just did that, and I think I built that for just nominal amount. Because a couple of kids and I did it. I told them what to do. I couldn't do the nailing. But I didn't even have a floor in it. But I got in the blacktop back there. It was just, icky. And so I knew the city was going to do some streets. So I followed this man, the manager, and around his truck one day, and I finally landed where he did. And he said, well, I think maybe in my tanks I'll have a little left over. And he said, I'll be glad to put it on yours.
Yeah.
So it cost us, I think at that time was when the oil had gone up so much, you know.
Yeah,
And the
right.
county said it
74
cost
or something,
$3,000
right?
to do that little
Yeah.
strip.
Yeah.
And I got it for a little over 100. But the fella just gave me
Yeah.
his time, you know.
Right.
But it was such a little strip there.
Yeah.
But they did blacktop it. So
Yeah.
then we really were in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
But the library only had 3,100 square
I
feet.
know.
It was
I know.
small.
I know.
And
And today
I knew
it's
we'd have to.
pushing at the
Yes.
seams. Yeah.
And I did the floor planning for the expansion myself.
Yeah.
I just couldn't see that character of the building changed.
Yeah.
And I kept working and working on it that year. And I worked out the floor plans and had them scaled
Yeah.
by a young man who was here. And so the county,
Yeah.
by that time it had been deeded to the county.
Yeah.
But I saved the county about $6,000-7,000.
And it's such a nice, well, it's such a warm,
I would have
attractive
done
building.
more to the north
Yeah.
there at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But Knowles owned that property, and
They did, and that property just sold again,
I had-
too. Makes me so
I had a
sick.
first refusal option.
Yeah.
Well, the Knowles property was closer.
Yeah.
The one that's there now isn't the Knowles property.
Oh, it isn't.
No, there was a building just 4 feet from us.
Oh.
Don't you remember there was a Knowles
Oh.
shacky building?
Yeah, I guess I do.
But anyway,
Yeah.
I couldn't build farther north, and Knowles would not sell to me. He had it tied up some way with the radio station. And I think if he'd tried, he could have sold it to us. But we couldn't get any more space there. So I had to just figure out how I could wrap the space around.
Yeah.
I put a fire retardant wall within the north side under the cedar.
Oh.
So it
Yeah.
was supposed to, but there was just 4 feet, you know,
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And then right after we got it built, well, then he tore it down,
Right.
sold it to us.
Yeah.
We tore it down.
Yeah. But I'd even like to see it, you know, that other property. I'd like to see the library be able to go into there.
Well, I had an opportunity to buy the rest, but in a way, there's 2 ways of looking at that.
Mm-hmm.
One is that we could use more space,
Mm-hmm.
but you get an unmanageable building if you get her too big,
Oh, that's true.
you know.
Yeah.
And I know we could use more in the Western history in that area. It's
Well,
awfully
and
crowded.
yeah, just offices. They do need They do need some office space.
Yes.
You know.
Well, you see, the original had just the one little pen there,
Yeah.
and I had it built so one person could manage the whole,
Yeah.
monitor the whole
Yeah,
library.
which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of those windows
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. Which makes it
And
good.
yes,
Yeah.
and it kind of gives a feeling of a flowing feeling
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I drew plans to enlarge after Knowles sold it to us,
Mhm.
to enlarge the Western history room. But the board would not go along. They didn't want. Well, Bonnie didn't really want it. She didn't want the mess. She'd had a mess with the other. But you know, it's hard to know what to do. And
Yeah. Well, at least, but you do have a wonderful library.
well, I think people coming from the outside are always complimentary.
Yes.
about it.
Everybody we have who comes to visit, and we take them to the library. They always say,
Yeah,
wow.
they're surprised
Yeah,
that
it's
a small
airy,
area
yeah.
could have this big,
Yeah.
good
Right.
library.
Yes, and it's
And
so much-
now there's another facet to it today because of the ability to secure books from all over.
Mhm.
Since we're in that system,
Yeah.
what do you call it?
Pathfinder.
No,
the
no,
interlibrary loan.
Well, that's part of it.
Or
We've
the
had
marmot.
that.
The marmot.
Marmot.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. I was able, when I was working on the family history, to get 2 books that I didn't suppose I would ever see. Because One was written in 1900 on the Mumford family, and the other one was on the Rodman family in 1880 something. And I knew they existed because I'd had excerpts sent to me from the books by the genealogist in New Jersey. And I knew they existed, but I didn't think I'd ever get them. I got them from out in California, from Sutro.
From the Sutro Library.
Yes.
Oh.
And actually, I copied a lot of the one on the Rodman family, simply because it isn't consistent, but it has pictures of these people. It was and it was just shelling off.
Yeah.
And I felt I'd never have that book again.
Yeah, right.
And Bonnie and I copied a lot of it.
Yeah.
There was, that family had been in, the Rodmans and the Mumfords were the first people in New Jersey, practically. And they were among the first people, I should say. And they settled the boundary disputes, Connecticut and Massachusetts, and bought land from the Indians, you know.
Okay.
And so much of that. And they started the woolen mills there. So much. And one of the Rodmans was secretary to Benjamin Franklin when he was ambassador to France. And there's just there's so much history in it.
Yeah.
And so I copied it, even though it isn't consistent, because that book was, I think, 3,000 pages. It was a big book, you know, thick book.
Yeah.
And we bound it over there. We have it in the binder. But because we can get material from everywhere, I think we answer people's
that's true. That's true.
Needs pretty well.
Yeah, between Marmot and Interlibrary Loan and
Sutro,
yes.
You can send almost every
Yeah.
place
Yeah,
and
you
get
can.
material.
Yeah, because I got a book for storytelling, Tales the Totem Tell, that was out of print since.
I used to use that book.
Did you? I love that book, and I got it from
Have
Albuquerque,
you ever
Texas.
found the one? I can't say it now. We'll talk about something else.
Okay.
I'll tell you when I think
it'll
of
come
it.
back in. Well,
Wawona. It was about the big trees in California. Cora Bruns suggested that. She'd seen the copy in the Colorado Reading Circle. And you know, the vocabulary was too mature for my third and fourth graders to read it and enjoy it.
Right.
So I would select parts of it and read to them, and then kind of tell them parts. And it traced the tree way back in antiquity, up to the seedling, and on and on and on. And it was, the vocabulary was just patterned after Indian mythology. It was beautiful. I used it 2 years, and somebody took that from Webster Hall. We never found it again. I don't know where it went.
It's so.
And I couldn't find where I didn't have the publisher. I didn't have anything.
Right.
Now,
now you could probably trace it down if you know the title. If you'd be able to trace it down.
I don't know who had written it. I think it wasn't popular because it was mature.
Yeah. And it probably is out of print, but you probably could get a
long
copy
ago,
somewhere.
yes.
You know, like Tales of Totem Tell. I never could. Bonnie would have bought it, but we couldn't get a copy.
No, there are books that just went out of print.
Yeah.
We just didn't.
But at least you can get them on loan.
Yes.
You know, copy the stories you like. But we won't talk about that. I want to ask you. I had a couple. I think you told me your biggest problem. What's your proudest achievement over the years you've spent in Gunnison?
Oh, I suppose the library.
Okay.
It's the biggest thing I've done, of course. Getting even some little child that has had problems and has emotional problems or has reading problems, that's a major achievement in itself lots of times, and you get as much satisfaction out of all those little things you do in life as you do the big things.
I suppose that's true.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
The world recognizes the big things.
That's true, but it's the little things.
And the little things many people never knew about.
Right. But it's, that makes it. Well, you spent, now in one article I saw 41 years teaching, and the other
31.
31, okay.
I corrected that
Yeah,
out of
okay.
the B&B printers,
Okay.
and then they made the mistake,
Okay.
never corrected it on their...
What was the highlight of your teaching?
I don't know. I think one of the things, going way, way back to the time I was just a kid, they had selected the three of us to go into the first grades under a supervisor and teach. And the second year of that, they sent to me, they said that people had moved from that district up to mine. And they sent this little boy, and the Opal Baudry said, "Oh, Anne," says, "I don't know what you're going to do with him. He was born with this encephalized, great big head. And as kindergartner, they'd had to lead him to the restrooms and lead him around, afraid he'd fall."
Yeah.
And she said, "I don't think he's ever going to be able to learn a thing." She had him in first grade. Well, he came to my school, and I tried my best to do what I could. I put him right over here, right in front, you know, and so we could watch everything that was going on. And I was, and I'd take him to the steps, and we were in the old high school building where there were steps everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
So he always waited in the evening, and I'd lead him down the steps and get him started over his home. But one evening there, sometimes he stayed a little longer than just to be let out comfortably. He said, "Miss Nelson, when you're counting, and you count through hundreds and thousands and millions and billions and trillions, where would you be when you have to stop?" I just about fell over. I thought, oh my gosh, I've got a brain in front of me that's never had a chance.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I don't think Seymour," he was a little Jew, Seymour Bernstein. I said, "Seymour, I don't think you'll ever have to count that far."
Yeah.
I said, "I guess you could go on forever, couldn't you?" And he had the most beautiful blue eyes and curly lashes and the sweetest smile, just beatific in a smile. And to come out with a question like that, and I think I learned then, don't ever underestimate a child. Because even with that exterior he had, it was baffling. It was baffling to him, because his hands was this way a lot, you know. And
now they can do something about it.
well, he was writing
Uh-huh.
before he left. He was 7 years old,
Yeah.
but he was writing. Father came to school one day. That was when I was earning $720 a year. Father came one evening. He said, "Now you teach Seymour to read." And I said, "Well, I certainly am going to try." That's before this happened. And he said, "You know, we pay you well."
Oh, yeah.
And I never wondered for a long time whether he was going to pay me extra or whether he was just paying me well.
As a taxpayer.
But I didn't get to follow Seymour. They moved to Des Moines, and I never knew what happened to him.
Yeah.
But I think he probably became a very good citizen
Uh-huh.
because he had the ability.
Uh-huh.
He learned to read,
Yeah.
and he learned
And obviously he could reason.
yes, reason.
Yeah.
He had a good head there.
Gee.
It was just too big.
Yes. Oh, I also want to mention your 1983 award from Colorado Library Association.
Oh, that was a volunteer award.
Oh, okay, for distinguished service.
Yes,
Right?
a distinguished volunteer.
Oh, okay, but for libraries.
Yes, for libraries.
Right. For something like 49 years as a public volunteer in the library, is that right?
Might have been at that
Okay.
time, I don't know.
All right, I have one more question to ask you. What's your secret of being so vibrant and energetic and alive at 92?
I don't know. I'm not always that way. We're not that way when we're young either. I've had average good health is all.
Mm-hmm.
It's not been. I've had quite a bit of surgery. I've had some problems, but I always, even as a child, I went to school every day. I had scarlet fever,
Oh my goodness.
and they didn't. My friend in my class, the doctor had diagnosed it as tonsillitis with a rash. And here we had scarlet fever in the classroom, and nobody knew it. I seemed to bounce back. I never had the flu in 1918. All my family did, except my father and I. And I've just been able to grin and bear it when I wasn't well. I guess that's all. You can't live that long and not have disappointments.
Mm-hmm.
Things that don't go right.
Mm-hmm.
People that don't work with you.
Mm-hmm.
There are frustrations. I didn't have a family. My husband died 30-some years ago.
Yes.
And I developed a subdivision,
Mm-hmm.
cut brush with the college kids. One of them that's taught at Burlington, Colorado for 29 years was here this summer with his own son.
Oh.
He does a recreational program there in the summer. And he's taught social studies there.
Uh-huh.
And he said this is his last year
Uh-huh.
of teaching.
Yeah, well, 29 years.
He
is a long
lived in this
time.
big square house up here, and he and his roommate cut brush with me, and I've worked with young people always.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's made perhaps more difference.
Oh, okay.
Now I go down to the nursing home. I have a few friends there,
Mhm.
and I visit them, but I don't relate to ill people
Mhm.
and old people,
Mhm.
and as much as I should, although my husband's mother lived to be the oldest woman in this county for 5 years, and we took care of her in a way. You know, she was not.
Was that when you lived in your the stone house on Wisconsin?
I never lived in that
Oh, you
house.
didn't live in
No.
that. Oh,
That
okay.
Frank built the big square house where Jerry Paquette lives. You know,
Yeah, right.
he built that in 1925 for the family.
Oh, okay. Well, what about where the Channels now live? That isn't one of your houses?
That John's family lived in it
Oh,
in the
okay.
early days.
Oh, I see. I see.
Uncle Fred,
Oh.
their uncle, built the house.
Oh, okay.
And the one block up was built for
where
Alonzo
Hutchinson's
Hartman.
lived. Yeah.
But I
Right.
don't know who this was built for. Fisher was one name.
Oh.
We have the record of it in the library.
So where did you live with your husband?
Well, we lived in a little house on the back of this lot, the first when we were first married, and that's been moved away.
Yeah.
And then we lived across the river on the acreage a while.
Okay. And
So-
then you lived in this
In
house.
this
Yeah,
house.
Yeah.
I've lived here since 1950.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's nice. I like this house. I think it's
Well, it's
a
an
nice
1882
little
house.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was in a good location,
Oh, I know.
especially after my husband died. I had some lots up the street, and we were intending to build on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then after his death, I decided not to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had those lots for years and years and years and years, where those little apartments are up there.
Well, how
But-
do you keep your memory so good? You remember every date, every name. I can't remember that, and I'm only 51.
Well, I don't know why. I had my younger brother, who was an invalid, actually had what I call a photographic memory. He loved movies when he was a
Uh-huh.
kid. When a picture, and when he was there as an invalid, when a picture would start on the television, a film, he could tell you who's acting in it,
Uh-huh.
and the year it came out, and everything. He had that kind of a memory.
Yes. And you do too.
But-
You must too, though.
I don't think I had as good a memory as my brother. Well, he did not have the creative abilities I have. I always had the creative ability.
Right. But
And
you have the good memory too, because when I do these interviews, people ask me, please don't ask me dates, because I can't remember dates. And so I'm very careful not to ask people
Yes.
dates, so they won't.
Well-
and they won't remember somebody's name from 40 years ago, which, I can't remember somebody's name from yesterday.
Well,
but,
I was
but you
bookkeeper
do.
at the store, and living here in town at that time, and running a credit business, and belonging to women's club, and different things. I knew the names of all the people in the community.
Yeah. And you
Very few.
probably still do, right?
Well, they're gone now.
I know.
I'm left.
Well, that's true.
Kay Andrews is down in the nursing home, and she lived here then. I go down and visit Kay. She's getting so deaf, it's hard to
Yeah,
visit.
right.
But it's her great grandson works out at Joseph's,
Oh,
and he waited, was cashier yesterday,
Uh-huh.
in there and seated us, and we always, Bonnie knows him quite
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
He's what is his name? Matthews,
Oh.
that sings. He should have graduated last year, but he had a couple of courses yet to take. He
oh,
took
up
more.
at the college? Or-
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
He's red-haired, and what is his first name? There's two Matthews boys, and one is he's a senior, and his brother's a sophomore, and they bought the house right across on the corner from Bonnie,
Oh, okay.
and the father worked at the bank,
Yeah.
but now that the bank is, going to go under different management,
Yeah.
and he had a job offer there that he couldn't turn down in Denver, so they went back to Denver.
Yeah.
She'd been a school librarian and
Yeah.
everything. She worked at the college a little bit after she came here, but they've moved back.
Well, is it hard to be 92 in a community where there aren't very many people anymore? That you grew
In
up
some
with?
ways it is, yes. If I hadn't had to live alone and make many decisions for all these years,
Mhm.
you see, Don died in 1960.
Mhm.
We were married in 30 and he died in 60.
Right.
And I had many decisions to make after that. I could have left the community, but we owned property here, and I knew people here,
Right. And you've been here
and
30
I was teaching here.
years.
I could have gone other places to teach several times
Yeah.
in the earlier days,
Yeah.
but I just didn't want to. I don't know, somehow, once you put down roots, my family's gone in Iowa.
Yeah.
And when your family changes, I had a cousin I hadn't seen for 20-some years here this summer.
Oh.
He was raised a few miles from me in Iowa, but he's 23 years younger than I am, so he was the youngest of the
Right,
youngest,
right.
my father's brother. But he worked on the space program with aerospace, and so he lives in Florida, raised his family down there, and he and his wife were here a while this summer. And it was nice to visit
Yeah.
with them, but he's almost a stranger because he grew up after I was in college.
Sure, that's right, 23. That's a lot, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't have any family back there.
So, well, I really appreciate it. Is there anything,
Well,
any
thank
last
you.
words you would like to say? Or
No.
No? Okay, well, thank you. That's